Welcome back to Truths of a Madman. This is part 3 in my series, What is Capitalism Really? In the first video, I broke down how capitalism works at its core. In the second, we looked at how the Industrial Revolution sped everything up and paved the way for what we now live under with Silicon Valley and the tech giants. But today, we're talking about something that changed the game entirely. Something that took capitalism, hit the turbo button, and cranked exploitation up to a whole new level. That's right, we're diving into neoliberalism. Now I'm going to give you a straightforward definition first, then we'll go through its history, and then I'll explain why it's one of the most destructive forces in modern society. After that, I'll be reacting to a video by Hakeem on neoliberalism to really dig into it. So let's get into it. So what is neoliberalism? At its most basic, neoliberalism is an economic and political ideology that emphasizes free markets, deregulation, privatization, and reducing the role of the state in economic life. Whereas classical liberalism in the 18th and 19th century was about freeing markets from monarchies and feudal lords, neoliberalism in the 20th century was about freeing markets from governments and social protections. Supporters argue that neoliberalism leads to innovation, efficiency, and global growth. Critics argue that it leads to inequality, instability, and exploitation. That's the neutral textbook definition. But now, let's look at how it actually came to power. Neoliberalism really started to gain traction in the mid-20th century. After World War II, most countries adopted policies that were closer to Keynesian economics. Governments investing heavily, regulating industries, and building social programs. This was sometimes called the golden age of capitalism. But in the background, a group of economists, think Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, and the Chicago School, were laying the groundwork for something different. They hated government intervention. They wanted markets to rule everything. But fast forward to the 1970s, the world hit an economic crisis. Stagflation, oil shocks, unemployment. Keynesian economics seemed to stop working, and that's when neoliberalism burst onto the scene. In the 1980s, leaders like Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the UK made neoliberalism the official policy of their countries. They slashed taxes on the wealthy, deregulated industries, broke up unions, and privatized public services. By the 1990s, neoliberalism went global. Institutions like the IMF and World Bank pushed neoliberal reforms on the countries in debt, forcing them to cut social programs, open up markets, and sell off state industries. And then in the 2000s and 2010s, we saw neoliberalism fuse with technology, especially in Silicon Valley. The tech giants we know today, Amazon, Google, Facebook, thrived in this deregulated environment, turning neoliberal policies into a digital empire. So from the 70s until now, neoliberalism has basically been the air we breathe under capitalism. But let's talk about what it's actually meant for ordinary people. Here's where I stop being neutral. Because neoliberalism isn't just an idea, it's a wrecking ball. It's led to the largest upward transfer of wealth in history. Billionaires multiplied while wages stagnated. It's gutted unions and workers' protection, leaving people powerless against corporations. It's privatized healthcare, education, even water in some countries, turning basic human needs into profit streams. It's left entire nations trapped in cycles of debt because of IMF-imposed quote-unquote structural adjustment programs. And in Silicon Valley, neoliberalism has given birth to the ultimate example of exploitation, where data, privacy, and human attention itself are bought and sold. Neoliberalism is capitalism on steroids. It's the system taking off the brakes and saying, let's see how much profit we can squeeze out before society collapses. So when people ask me what the worst form of capitalism is, I point to neoliberalism. Because this isn't just capitalism quietly running in the background. This is capitalism in its most aggressive, predatory form. Okay, so now I'm going to watch a video with you guys by Hakeem, a great channel. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. This is called What Exactly is Neoliberalism? I just want to watch this with you and react to it, talk about it along the way, see how it coincides with what I was talking about. Okay, so let's go.
Hi there. What is neoliberalism? We hear the term very often, but rarely see it defined. Supposedly, we live under neoliberalism now, but how exactly? It has liberal in the name, isn't that supposed to be good? No, not really, but we'll get into that. The general thesis of tax cuts for the rich and budget cuts for public programs is kind of relevant, but not exactly all that neoliberalism entails. As a system, neoliberalism ramped up during the very beginning of the dismantling of European social democracy from the 80s onwards. Initially, post-World War II, a grand rebuilding of Europe, combined with the sheer popularity of socialist forces, both in the form of political parties in France, Italy, etc., as well as the influence of then-existing socialist nations such as the USSR, with its full employment, free healthcare, education, extensive social benefits, amongst all the rest, resulted in a choice for the ruling classes of the re-emerging European nations. Either they acquiesce to the general demands represented by socialist forces without giving up their power, or risk losing power through revolution mixed with popular electoral action.
Okay, so I'm sure he's going to explain, but yeah, after World War II, there was a choice for the governments to lose power, lose capitalism, give in, or not give in, but try to fight all of the working class, and there'd be a revolution, and then 100% we'd be in a better place right now. But instead, they chose to protect themselves, and they kind of made a compromise, like reforms. I mean, I wish it would have gone the other way, honestly. Okay.
They picked the former, and so was European social democracy born. Of course, unlike in socialist countries, social democratic countries supported their social programs through neo-colonial, imperialist, and otherwise exploitative relations with the economic periphery, which today runs to the level of over $10 trillion, if you can believe it.
Jesus.
If you're interested in the details, check out my unequal exchange video here. The details and foundations of what would become neoliberalism extend back into the 30s actually, but that's too much detail for the current analysis, so read The New Way of the World, Our Neoliberal Society if you're interested. Anyways, this state of affairs remained till the 1980s, in which a boldened group of ideologues, usually represented by the ghoulish features of Thatcher and Reagan, thought differently on how the...
I just want that's funny, the ghoulish features, I love it. Look at these two. Change the world in the worst way possible. I just wanted to say something really quick. So neoliberalism is, I mean, I talk about this in the video a little bit, but I just wanted to say that it is the worst thing in the world. It is the most evil. I don't know. It's just the most evil way of doing something, and it's so against humanity. I mean, they developed this theory called like the shock therapy. Basically, they used it in torture, right? And but they decided to kind of use the same ideas in trying to reform, or not even reform, but basically like wipe the slate clean of a country and reform it in neoliberal ideology, right? And in the economy and everything. But when there's plenty of examples of this, like Chile, Argentina, the former Soviet Union, Iraq. It goes on and on. But every time that they have done that, what they call shock therapy to a country, it's devastated the country. It's caused, it's created billionaires in the country, and then it's the division of wealth has been so just huge gap. People go into poverty. The country just falls into ruin. They get into debt. It just devastates these countries. Obviously, Iraq is the most recent, and it's awful. And I can't believe that groups of people that are leaders would treat other humans like this. It's like the most evil thing in the world, and they think it's okay, like in their heads. I don't even know, but it's just I just had to put that in there because I didn't go into as much detail on some of the specifics of neoliberalism, but he might do more in this video. So anyway, I'm not gonna talk forever. Let's move on with this.
Ruling class should exercise their power, and how the system set up entirely to serve their interests should be a lot more blatant in that aspect. This wasn't some idea that fell from the skies either. Instead, it had real material reasons for its emergence. Over two generalized recessions, 1974-5 and 1980-82, the capitalist system suffered an accumulation crisis that was qualitatively and quantitatively different from a cyclical downturn. All at once, capitalist countries confronted sluggish economic growth, high unemployment, a collapse in investment, dwindling world trade, and skyrocketing inflation. This economic contraction was defined by a long-term decline in profitability. To draw a concrete definition, neoliberalism is a set of economic and political views and policies used to administer a capitalist state, which is characterized by attacks on, or even the total destruction of, many previous concessions to the working class, welfare, and other social programs.
Yeah. So it's triad of policies are deregulate, privatize, and cut welfare, basically gut welfare systems. So every part of that triad of policies is awful for the American working class people. And also, I just want to say this too, that all the research I did on neoliberalism, the one thing that it consistently did was grab for power. It basically it's a power grab plan for the oligarch or the rich to hold on to their power and continue to get richer. It does that perfectly, but in return it makes everybody else poorer. So it doesn't do any, like, they have this utopian idea theory that it's letting the market free and it's gonna make everything right magically and all this kind of stuff, but that's just bullshit. All it is they're implementing plans to make sure that they hold on to power and just get richer while everybody else suffers, and they destroy countries over it. So anyway,
this takes the form of a wide variety of actions, including the dismantling or sidelining of labor unions, the rewriting or deletion of pro-labor legislation, the lowering of real wages, meaning not necessarily less total income, although that happens too, but a reduction of the value of wages adjusted for inflation, essentially meaning you can buy less stuff despite the amount you're making not going down all that much, which is what we've seen plenty of since COVID. Attacks on pension plans, such as with the recent protests in France, reduced regulations for corporations, specifically in the fields of labor safety, benefits, and environmental protections, the lowering of taxes for corporations and the wealthy, the removal of barriers to so-called free trade, which we'll get into in a second, amongst other developments. Much more relevant, though, is neoliberalism as an ideological dogma in which everything should be left to the market. Maternity leave, climate change, you name it, supposedly the market will solve it and solve it best.
Yeah,
the
magic.
more deregulation, the more quote-unquote healthy an economy is. This way of thinking emerged as a result of the various contradictions facing highly developed capitalist countries, and by extension the general contradictions of capitalism themselves. At first, it made political and economic sense to grant concessions in the form of social democracy, but that no longer flies. Crises of overproduction, in which more stuff is produced than there is demand for,
Look at that.
leading to critical losses for enterprises, to overly simplify. The falling rate of profit, which is a measurable tendency under capitalism in which automation, as well as standard organizational development of enterprises, results in less total profits, essentially destroying the system in the long run as profit is required for capital reinvestment so that capitalism as a system can continue.
Okay, so just in case you didn't quite understand what he's talking about, so basically, overproduction and the slowing down of capital. Capitalism only works if capital is always in motion. If it's in motion, then it's going to continue. But as it starts to slow down, profit starts to kind of slow down or even level out. It creates stagnation, and then the economy suffers under capitalism that way. So they got to continue to keep that capital moving, and they do it in awful ways which destroy humans and the environment, the two things that we need to live on this earth and be part of this earth, and be good humans, I guess. So he's kind of going over that right now, how capital always has to be in motion,
Continue, amongst others. These changes result in those earlier social democratic concessions no longer being practical, and hence for the sake of corporate profits are quickly and entirely eliminated, or at least a powerful attempt is made at just that. For an overview of these concepts, the falling rate of profit, etc., check out my 101 videos here.
Yeah, check them out, man.
In a sentence, neoliberalism is a general policy of shifting and taking out all the negative effects of the worsening capitalist economic crisis on the regular working people. This is done through leaving social distribution to the market solely, or at least attempting to do so. What exactly does free market capitalism and leaving it to the market really entail, though? Essentially, free markets means no social or government interference in the market. Concretely, this also extends to how enterprises are run. Capitalists own the means of production, meaning land, factories, natural resources, etc., and lord over it, believing that everything to do with their means of production and products produced thereof should be completely and unilaterally up to them. They set whatever wages, meaning no minimum wage or other.
Yeah, and so the problem with all that, obviously, is when it's left up to the market, the free market, pretty much left up to the big businesses, the CEOs, the billionaires, the oligarchy. When it's left up to them, it obviously just makes everything worse. Everybody suffers. The poor get poorer. The middle class becomes non-existent. The rich get richer until what? The earth is destroyed and there's just a bunch of rich people in their space stations. I don't know. There's plenty of movies about that, but that's basically what's going to happen. And if we continue down this road, right?
Pesky government mandate. Do whatever they want with waste, dump it in the river, why not? Sell to whoever at whatever price, crack on the playground. Reinvest their profits however they like, you name it. I'm being comedic, but in essence, this total freedom is the essence of so-called free markets. Better examples include horrifically low wages for dangerous work, increased environmental pollution, price hiking of vital goods such as medicines, amongst other examples. This freedom is contradictory.
Oh, just so you know, they did that in Iraq. Oh, I forget the name of the head of the defense department at the time when in the Bush administration. But anyway, he came in. He was a businessman, and he came in and he kind of gutted the whole Pentagon basically right before 9/11, and then when that happened, that we eventually after all that stuff, I'm gonna go through it really quick, but after all that, we go into to decide to occupy Iraq, and this guy, basically he had huge businesses in pharma, so he had like vaccines and stuff for things that we need. So then anytime there was a scare of some kind, he would get richer over it. And I'm leaving out all kinds of detail and probably not saying everything about it, but you could look into it for sure. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that capitalism does, when left unchecked.
Victory as social organization ends up being incredibly one-sided. Local communities, workers, or the government have no say in the production process or its byproducts under this model. Only capitalists do. As a
Yeah.
result, this is less quote-unquote free and more an ideological setup used to make the system the most convenient solely for owners in an explicitly anti-democratic way. Of course, this ideological posturing is contradictory too, as real historical practice shows that they pretend to not like government interference so long as it doesn't
That guy is. Every time I see pictures of Elon Musk, I just think of like a little goblin, little ghoul.
benefit them directly, and when in power, they make plenty use of it. Neoliberals have tried to bend the state into promoting markets at every level of society,
Oh
in
yeah.
essence, using state power for political means, which is a pastime of all.
Oh yeah, and also I wanted to say this. I just thought of this. That's another thing that anytime we occupy any of these countries and try to do the shock treatment, quote unquote, to them, we in the end, big businesses come in and buy up state-owned property. After they privatize it, they buy it up for pennies on the dollar, and they use public money to do it. So it's basically like a big money laundering scheme to destroy countries. That's neoliberalism.
Socioeconomic systems. To note, though, this isn't trying to stand neoliberalism against a so-called pure capitalism. They're both capitalism, but neoliberalism is the current practice and is especially mask-off.
Oh yeah.
On the point of freedom, let's get on a slight detour to a little-known Georgian poet and political activist who said, "It is difficult for me to imagine what personal liberty is enjoyed by an unemployed person who goes about hungry and cannot find employment. Real liberty can exist only where exploitation has been abolished, where there is no oppression of some by others, where there is no unemployment and poverty, where a man is not haunted by the fear of being tomorrow deprived of work, of home, and of bread. Only in such a society is real, and not paper, personal and every other liberty possible."
Yeah, Joseph Stalin, right here. He actually understood that materialism is what matters, not just some stupid magical theory that of perfect utopian economies.
The relevance of these words will be even clearer as we go on. Leaving it to the market entails the supremacy of market competition, with subsequent market winners and losers being delegated to differing fates. That being political power and protection for the position of market winners, and the inverse for those that lose in the market or never take part, meaning regular workers and everyone else. This goes likewise for previously state-delivered services such as education and healthcare. Neoliberalism in practice didn't abolish them, but instead attempted to entirely privatize them and subject them to market forces. Taxation or otherwise citizen-funded endeavors extend only so far as to maintain and grow market relations. Nowhere was this more blatant than in Chile, in which the CIA-backed dictator Pinochet overthrew the democratically elected socialist Allende, and afterwards instituted a mass privatization system which included, amongst others,
Look at this guy. This guy, Pinochet, he would go around in his suit all the time like he was some kind of a celebrity, and he was a freaking demon.
Private hospitals, private insurance firms, and private schooling, all on market basis, with workers forced to fund the emergence and maintenance of these new markets. The consequences of these policies resulted in 42% of Chileans living in poverty by the end of Pinochet's reign, as income inequality skyrocketed. Following Pinochet's footsteps, but straitjacketed by their surface-level commitment to democracy, Thatcher in the UK and Reagan in the US attempted likewise to introduce this concept of competition in every sphere, and the forceful imposition of market relations on public services took place, along with restricting labor unions, cracking down on strikes, and of course skyrocketing inequality.
Terrible.
With Thatcher, household debt increased from 37% to 70% of GDP, unemployment hit 9.5% by 1984, 15% of the UK's industrial base was wiped out in just a few years, entire communities disappeared, with Scotland losing 20% of its workforce as a result. In the most insidious of policies, Thatcher's government brought in the Right to Buy scheme in 1980. This allowed social housing tenants to buy the properties they lived in from their local government office. This quickly dried up the government's supply of social housing, which combined with declining construction of housing, resulted in a sharp marketization of housing, with house prices rising.
Yeah, so it helped her a little bit to do this then, because the people who could afford to buy these houses at the time, like the middle class, I guess you would call it, they were happy, they got an asset, but like everybody else that couldn't afford to buy it, they were forced out, and they were forced to rent after that. And then the cost of housing and rent just obviously just once it's privatized just skyrockets or goes up anyway. So that's what that did.
Over 1,000% since 1980, making it all but impossible for young people to buy even the cheapest homes in their area. This was all by design.
Yeah.
I won't mention Reagan today because I'd rather you sleep soundly tonight. Here enters the IMF, who in the early 80s, along with the World Bank, became the global purveyors of neoliberal orthodoxy.
Oh, yeah.
The model was simple. An overexploited third world nation, usually a former colony that only recently became independent, is burdened by inequalities and industrial deficiencies as a result of colonialism. These nations also usually were economically sanctioned or otherwise limited by their former colonial masters, who would demand colonial taxes even after independence. Through high-interest funds borrowed from the IMF, said nations couldn't pay back everything to the letter that the IMF desired, usually by design, and as a result would be forced to undergo so-called structural adjustment programs, where welfare cuts, liberalization of the market, and privatization took place, usually with ownership transferring back from said third world state to the former colonial power or whatever imperialist hegemon, be they local or global. This is going on to this day, with the most recent being IMF payments to Ghana, which historically came with strings attached such as raising electricity and water tariffs, mass privatization of water resources and mining facilities, cuts to public sector employment, and other so-called cost-cutting measures. Ghana currently pays between 70% and 100% of government revenue to meet these requirements each year, in a cycle meant to keep them paying to the benefit of the imperial core. Likewise with Egypt, that has agreed to sell off $2 billion worth of state assets along with slashes to public sector spending, the cutting of state subsidies which over 30 million Egyptians in poverty rely on to keep basic staples affordable, as well as privatization of over 30 state-owned companies ranging from water purification to oil and gas. If you're interested in how deep this systematic overexploitation of the global south goes, take a look at my video titled Why Do Poor Countries Stay Poor? That's for nations. How about for people? Neoliberalism applied socially abides by the two nonsense maxims of if you work harder, you'll do ever better in life, despite lacking the nuances of generational wealth, ethnic, racial, or gender discrimination, systemic ceilings, amongst many other things.
Yeah.
The second being, if you don't make it in the system, it's a personal failing. It's solely your fault. You're too lazy to save, too lazy to get and maintain a job, too lazy to work harder.
So awful.
And that's why, for example, those interest rates on medical bills you have outpace your ability to pay them, keeping you in poverty. This last bit is tongue-in-cheek. Essentially, they strip nuance away and attempt to personalize reasons for systematic social failings such as homelessness, unemployment, and poverty. This extends naturally to taxation.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say real quick, I mean, he's saying it, but it's just unbelievable to me that they're basically they're pinning homelessness and, not being able to get jobs, like unemployment, not buy houses. They're pinning all of those systematic problems on individuals because they're basically saying, why don't you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and try harder, right? And it's like impossible. It's so devastating. It messes with people's minds, man. It's just bullshit. Okay.
Firstly, for a Marxist view on taxation, take a look at this video here. A quick TLDR though is, taxation is relatively insignificant compared to the surplus value extracted out of you each working day, that being the value you produce above what goes to supplying your wage. Anyways, since becoming wealthy supposedly naturally results from working harder, taxing the wealthy disincentivizes hard work. This could reduce their overall investment in their businesses, apparently, and as a result is intervention in the market, which we cannot stand for. Likewise, with the aforementioned privatization of government services, less unions, less worker protections, increased likelihood of destitution if you were to be fired as no safety nets exist. All of these are pro-market strategies that reverse the prioritization of so-called...
Yeah, so that's awful too, because it's basically a scare tactic that they keep this kind of labor pool, a certain amount of people unemployed is okay, so that there can always be other people that want to do the job if you're complaining about it, and so everybody's scared to lose their jobs, because if they lose their jobs, they're going to lose their place to live and become, homeless possibly. And so obviously they're just going to settle for whatever the capitalist wants to give to them and exploit them even more.
Lazy workers who got unnecessary assurances that they won't be kicked out through worker protections, that they won't be made destitute by bills as healthcare was public, so on and so forth. A desperate working class with no protections is far more agreeable to whatever terms the capitalist class dictates,
yeah, that's what
and
I
as
just
such
said.
ruling class power is further entrenched. This is class struggle.
Yep.
Nowhere did this take on more geopolitically catastrophic consequences than in Eastern Europe, where a rapidly declining population
My
and
God.
skyrocketing poverty equaled wartime levels during the market-liberalized peace of the 1990s. I cover this more extensively in my video Ghost Towns, the Silent Depopulation of Eastern Europe, here. In the end, should capitalist power be threatened, this thinned-out facade of democracy would be shed entirely as fascism emerges to protect the wealth, property, and capital of that class as its scapegoats, immigrants, or women, or Jews, or communists, or whoever else. My video, Why Does Everyone Hate the West, goes into further detail if you're interested. Whether neoliberal or not, capitalism is a system that has outlived its usefulness and it's time to go beyond.
Yes.
As to the why, and where will we go afterwards, check out my twin videos on capitalism and socialism here. That's all for this time. If you enjoy what I do, then please consider.
Sweet. Okay. So yeah, definitely go check out Hakeem. I will put a link to his channel in the description of this video. Okay. Hope you guys enjoyed this. He pretty much said everything I was saying. Hopefully I didn't interrupt too much. I had to put my 2 cents in here. So yeah. So that's neoliberalism, where it came from and what it's done, and why I think it's the most dangerous stage of capitalism so far. So before I wrap up this video, I want to touch on a few of the most brutal examples of neoliberalism in action. Because it's not just theory, it's not just abstract economics. In practice, back in Chile in the 1970s and Argentina, they were forced into what's often called shock therapy. And after the U.S. backed coup in Chile against Salvador Allende, if I said that right, the Chicago boys moved in with neoliberal policies and privatized industries, gutted social programs, and handed power over to the corporations. All under the cover of a dictator, Pinochet, awful guy. And then Argentina went through similar turmoil. There was basically like concentration camps that people were taken into that seemed to be, that were thought of to be, socialist supporters or communists that didn't want this dictatorship, this awful stuff. If it was you, would you want this awful thing to be happening to your country? And obviously, you'd want to say something against that. Well, they were swooping up people. The CIA and others were swooping up people and taking them to these prisons and torturing them. And they were making a show of it to try to scare others to not, go that route. It was devastating. So, and then later in the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States decided to push the shock therapy on Russia. And pretty much overnight, the state industries were privatized, wealth was looted, and people were thrown into poverty while a handful of the oligarchs got rich, obviously. And that, like I said before, that's what neoliberalism is good at. That's basically, I think, what it was designed to do. And then we saw the same pattern against Iraq after the U.S. invasion in 2003. Entire industries sold off, the economy opened up to foreign corporations, and the country was left in ruins, you guys. Awful thing. So this is neoliberalism in its rawest form, using crisis and war. So basically like using a crisis, which is a form of shock. Then they piggyback off of that and do like an economic shock. And they seize power just for profit, for it's corporate capitalism at its finest. If you want to dig deeper into any of this stuff, any of this history, I highly recommend 2 books in particular. David Harvey's A Brief History of Neoliberalism, great book, I think. And then also one more that I really loved. It's called the Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. Those 2 together will give you a good overview of everything I've talked about in this. And I'll put the link. I'll put the links to everything that I use to research this subject in the description. Okay. So to me, neoliberalism isn't just an economic model, it's it's corporate capitalism weaponized, basically. It's the proof of how far capitalism will go when it's unchecked, and it's a reminder of why we need to build something better. So thanks for watching, you guys. Thanks for watching this breakdown of neoliberalism. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, especially if you've lived through or studied any of these policies firsthand. Don't forget to subscribe to Truths of Madman. I'm going to be doing the next part of this series. I'm going to be going into, what the future could be like. One way, if we continue with capitalism, the dystopia that's going to end up as, at least how I see it, and then the other way, if we choose to go the socialism route and ultimately communism. Those two paths. I'm going to do a video on what, the future could be like with AI and robotics if we take one of those paths, which is dystopian, the other utopian, possibly. So that's my next plan. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Workers of the world unite. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.